juvenile justice reform is going to reshape the way that Georgia holds those kids, and then the availability, the resources that they need to get in order to be successful. Now, how do I personally feel? As commissioner, of course, twofold. One is my personal belief, and then two, from a commissioner's perspective. What I see personally is a better Georgia. What I see as it relates to being a commissioner, I see a better Georgia. Because, number one, we're going to get the treatment that some of these kids, when you have over 37% of kids that come in our system with mental health issues, and getting those kids the right treatment for their whatever the issue is going to be tremendous. It'll give the judges a more in-depth review of what's coming in before they actually commit a kid to us. It's going to give them an overview with the different assessment tools that's going to be utilized. We're going to be able to better address the kids' needs, not necessarily dealing with the criminal act. It will be taken care of in itself. But what I see as commissioner, we're going to have the kids that's committed to the state, that should be committed, kids that's in the community under community supervision, getting the treatment, getting the rehabilitation, so that those kids will not become a more of a burdensome on the taxpayers of Georgia. So that's what I see, both personally and as a commissioner.
Judge Teske, if you and Commissioner Niles could talk with us for a moment about the application of the work just completed by the Council on Criminal Justice Reform, heavy emphasis on reentry. How do you see that applying going forward to the Department of Juvenile Justice?
Well, first, taken what the commissioner just described, about what the changes are going to mean and the expected outcomes. I think the most important thing is measuring those things. How do we do it, and figuring out how we do it, which is what we have done this last year. With the help of the Pew Charitable Trust and Annie Casey Foundation, is putting together a document that guides us, it directs us, okay, on what to measure, how to measure it, okay, and in so doing, then we will determine whether or not, these expectations are coming to fruition, okay, and that's where we are, I think, different than reforms in the past, not only in Georgia, but in many other states, is that, in the past, what happens too frequently is that we reform our systems, right, and then we walk away, and we say, okay, we reformed it, we pat each other on the back, and then we move on to something else, but we don't measure it, and we don't continue to look at other changes, because what we should be doing is that when we begin to change something, that means we're opening something up. When you open something up, it may take you, you expose it, and it may take us yet on another path, and it may yet open up another box that we didn't know exist in the initial reform effort, in the initial analysis. And so that's why it was so important that we created this reform commission, this 5-year commission, so that we keep looking at it. Now that's the beginning of it. Okay, that's the big part of it, because since the new code didn't go into effect until the 1st, okay, we don't have anything to measure yet. All right, so we decided to spend 2013 on the juvenile justice side on developing this practice. This guideline on how we're going to measure these practices. Whereas on the adult side, you saw a lot of substantive changes there. Okay, now the other thing, though, I think as we move forward, looking at the 2013 recommendations to the governors, is this issue on recidivism. Right. We decided that we are going to adopt a 3-year, recidivism standard. I will tell you, there were discussions among some folks out there to do it 1 year. I was very critical of that, extremely critical of that. If we want to be transparent, okay, with our taxpayers, when it comes to community safety and protection, then we need to be following these youngsters, right, as far out as we can, to determine if what we're doing relative to evidence-based practices,
Does it work?
does it work, right? Okay. And then lastly is this Interstate Compact. Oh my gracious. We have been receiving juveniles from other states into our state who are juvenile delinquents. That in the past, when we were a member of the Interstate Compact, that state would have transferred that case through the compact, would have been accepted, that this kid would have been placed on supervision, would have been watched over, but they cannot be watched over. These other states are just simply saying, well, Georgia's not a member, the family's moved to Georgia, we're just going to terminate and we're just going to ship them off to Georgia. And we have these families with these kids who have been delinquents in other states coming into our state without any supervision.
And that's the community impact that public safety concerns me, compared to where if we was part of the agreement, then we would know who's coming in and we would know their chart. Whereas now, before this, we wouldn't know.
Yes.
We wouldn't know what street they were on. We wouldn't know their current charges, or we wouldn't know anything about them or the parents concerning the betterment. How can we help somebody when we don't know anything about them?
Absolutely. And you know what? I have to give a great deal of credit, because as the juvenile court judge on the commission, right? Okay, and in our conversation, you and I, we talk every week.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate in opening the dialogue as a member of the commission with the governor, that the governor had an open mind, listened, and understood that this is a serious issue relative to community safety, which is foremost on his mind, is protecting the community. Okay, and quite frankly, this would not be going forward if it were not for Governor Deal's understanding, especially having been a former juvenile court judge, and he knows the landscape of our business.
Yeah. So when you talk about reentry, we as a state agency have set aside our staff to make sure that we tracking our kids, and when they leave us, we're leaving them in a better position not to reoffend, that we have all resources, that the kid, those wraparound services will be so important to that kid's livelihood, so that we don't disengage, but we re-engage that kid and embrace him or her, making sure that they get the right resources in the community, so that they will not, or so that they can turn away from that sin, from that misconduct, and be on the straight and narrow to be a productive person, whether that's getting back in a traditional school setting or going into a technical school. One of the advantages that we have is in our system, the 181st School District, is we have vocationary opportunities for those kids. And when the governor came out and said about welding, we're reshaping our facilities to make sure that welding is one of those vocationary school or vocationary programs that's being taught in our facilities, so that those kids can leave us with that particular skill set to walk in a job and be productive. And those are the type things that the governor is doing to make sure that Georgia workforce, the Economic Development Authority, is embracing those particular welding, whether it's truck driving, automotive mechanics. Those are type things that we're doing within our school system to better those kids and get those ready to transition into the community, so that when they leave us, they will have some kind of employment opportunity to better enhance their abilities to provide for their family.
But in the same vein, what is often overlooked in this reform, commission report is that even though in appearance it's produced from the adult side,
Yep.
okay, there are things that are recommended from the adult side that's going to have a positive effect on the juvenile justice side. Yep. Take, for example, since you're mentioning reentry, okay, ban the box.
Yep.
Okay. Rebuttable presumption. Defense to a negligent hiring.
Yep.
Okay. Creating a cause of action for those out there who are providing background checks for these employers that do not include truthful information about these individuals re-entering into society.
Right.
How is that significant to juvenile justice? Because when you take a look at the kids that are coming out of your system, many of them have already reached age 18, 17 and 18. These kids we're talking about have a future in adulthood, okay? They need to have this economic opportunity provided to them in order for success to occur and not recidivate.
Right.
We have to remove the walls. We have to remove the impediments. Our failure to do that as a society, okay, is only going to ensure that recidivism remains high. We must remove the impediments like these. Give offenders, youthful offenders, an opportunity for economic growth that only in turn is going to provide greater economic growth in this state. The more taxpayers we have working, the more revenues this state will have. The better school systems and education this school will have. The better infrastructure this state will have. Governor Deal, okay, and this legislature, their focus is comprehensive. How can we build a better Georgia for every citizen?
Gentlemen, I'd like to ask you one follow-up question, and thank you for your time this morning. And that is what we know about the relationship between being a long-term foster care youth and eventual participation in the juvenile or adult correction systems.
Yeah, we call those crossover youth. We now know, with the help of studies from the Child Welfare League of America, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges, from all these studies that long-term foster care kids have a higher risk of delinquency. We know this because, and I believe that one day, at least I'm advocating that one day, in our risk and need screening instruments, we will add a 9th risk factor called trauma. Right. Because many of these kids are in foster care. Why? Because they've been traumatized. And trauma is a pathway to delinquency. And we need to be developing a way to focus on kids in foster care, providing them the type of services that focus on preventing delinquency as a result of their trauma that they experienced in childhood. And how do they address that trauma in a positive way and are equipped with the tools to prevent delinquency?
And even when I used to work cases at the juvenile level, when I was a investigator, when you think about the impact of kids, when you talk about trauma, the issues that put them into foster care, that's traumatizing. When you take a kid and they grow up in a environment that's not suitable, that could traumatize a child. And then when that child violates state law, that can traumatize a child. Then when you place that child in the state's custody, that can traumatize a child. When you place that child in secure confinement, that traumatizes. So I'm so glad that you're looking at, or will be looking at that segment to where that trauma is so should be sliced and look at and deal with that core root as it relates to traumatizing a child. And I'm a firm believer that if and when Georgia raises up a child, and then that child goes back to be a productive person in his family, the family rises up. When the family rises up, the town, the community, the county rises up. When that community rises up, that makes for a better Georgia. And when Georgia is better, that makes for a better United States. And at the end of the day, it's what you do for the least of these that really matters.
And what the reform is going to do, and what we're seeking to do, okay, the model is greater collaboration. I mean, in the old code, the only time collaboration was mentioned was in one statute called the Community-Based Risk Reduction Statute, where judges are authorized to bring stakeholders together to develop written protocols to address delinquency, unruliness, and what the old term deprivation. Right? But if you look at the new code, collaboration's all over the place. In the introduction, okay? You know, it's all about bringing the stakeholders together. Why is that so important about this issue of long-term foster care and the high risk of this targeted population becoming delinquents? Is because in the past, we would turf guard.
Yep.
You know, if in the Department of Family and Children's Services, now I remember the days that if a child was in foster care, committed a delinquent act, that I'm telling you, in front of my bitch, I would have a DFACS worker say to a DJJ worker or a probation officer, "It's your kid now." And in front of the kid, yet another traumatizing event.
Right.
Okay, this reform is about forcing folks to come together. And it's not because they didn't want to in the first place. It was because the system, you know, really didn't, you know, endear to that, okay? And so people were operating in individual silos.
Right. But I thought it was a system of care.
That's right, and it's supposed to be. And that's what we're creating in this reform,
That's
is all
exactly
these
right.
individual system of cares all throughout the
Yes.
state of Georgia. Okay, yeah.
Excellent.
Commissioner Niles, Judge Teske, thank you for speaking with us this
Yes,
morning.
sir. Most definitely.
Great partners.
Yes, sir.
All right.